And we will, at the end here, we will provide you with more information if you want to learn more about that trial. We're going to watch yours from Ablo therapy. Again, think about, you can think about the need for targeted treatments. What are your thoughts on needing those? I see a little sign saying my internet is a little unstable, so let's cross our fingers that I get through this last little video snip.
Initially, most patients are started with NSAIDs and steroid treatments, and there are some short-term and long-term side effects with these treatments. And then for patients that don't have any sort of improvement of their symptoms, they're called refractory patients. They are patients with a disease or condition that doesn't respond to treatment. Then you have the stronger drugs. So those disease-modifying agents like methotrexate, or IL-1, IL-1 beta, IL-6, and anti-TNF antibodies, which we've heard people talk about today. And here are some of the names of the drugs that are currently used. So, and what's very, very important, as Jeanette said, you guys set me up really well, that patients have to be carefully monitored for the development of MAS, macrophage activation syndrome. And while many patients do derive at least partial benefit from some of these treatments, some patients remain refractory, they don't respond at all, or they'll partially respond, and they're called partially refractory. So here at Avalo Therapeutics, we believe there is need for more targeted therapies. And so we're targeting IL-18. It's, as Rashmi has said, and Jeanette has led up to it, IL-18 has really shown a critical role in various anti-inflammatory diseases. So right now we are targeting Still's. And so if you take a look at this, it's a little similar to the figure that Rashmi presented. IL-18 correlates with Still's disease activity. So if you look at this, in this study, 38 patients were diagnosed with adult onset Still's disease, 20 patients with SJIA, and then they wanted to look at patients, they took 65 adults and 23 children who had fever and or arthritis, but didn't meet the diagnosis for acute onset Still's or SJIA, and they served as their comparison group. And so if you look at the comparison group versus the patients that had the disease, you can see that IL-18 is almost 1,000-fold greater of elevated IL-18 serum levels. So we believe it's a significant and important biomarker in AOSD as well as SJIA. And so if we can find a biomarker, then hopefully we can try to decrease those IL-18 levels, and the disease hopefully will, your symptoms will decrease. That's the theory that we're using. So you can also find IL-18 in other inflammatory diseases because IL-18 is part of the inflammatory pathway. But again, unfortunately, AOSD has the highest. So compared to lupus or systemic sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or healthy patients, you can see that the IL-18 levels are markedly higher in AOSD patients. So based on that, and then also very, very similar again in systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, SJIA. And so here we have the diagnosis prevalence, again, diagnosis of exclusion, and IL-18 is significantly elevated. So if you look at SJIA active disease, and then patients with partial remission and patients with remission, you can see that when IL-18 goes down, so do the symptoms, and then these are our comparator groups.
So that was the last segment that we're going to play, because I'm going to just talk through the rest of it. But to point out again, it's that we're talking really more about these targeted treatments. And I think that that is really important to note, because I've talked this whole time about clinical trials and the different phases, and it can take 10 to 15 years to get a drug to market. But one of the things that our organization is very invested in is precision medicine. And precision medicine is really starting to focus in more on those biomarkers, more on those different things that can be measured in your blood, or your blood pressure, or different just things that can be measured, and understanding the subgroups. And we call them the atypical typicals, because we tend to think that more people are atypical or wouldn't be able to be in normal clinical trials than typical, or that's general patient population. In saying that, we are very vested in starting to better understand who can be matched at the right with the right treatment at the right time. So she went into this study here, and again, it was pretty scientific. So I decided instead, why don't I make it a slide and just walk you through a couple of the main points here. So essentially, they have tested this drug, this IL-18 anti, which means again blocking it, in a different disease. It wasn't adult onset. It was COPD, and you can see the kind of the takeaways were really that it was well tolerated. And it looks like there were 25 patients who took the active drug. And so so looking at the no serious side effects, mild side effects. I know side effects is a big one when we talk about treatments, and well tolerated. So that's kind of safety and efficacy. That's what these early trials are really trying to achieve. And again, they are always on a small group, because if there is anything adverse, you certainly don't want it impacting a whole lot of people. But the good news is now they've moved past, and they've shown that there's safety and efficacy, and so they're ready to move on and test it to see if it will work and they're doing adult onset only because a lot of times in clinical trials you cannot there's different legalities, there's different ethical things that come up when you do a trial on a juvenile. So that's why you tend to see this you'll see the adult onset. But I want to remind you, if you've been with us since the beginning, if Still's disease is a continuum, then if they're testing the adults, theoretically, this should then also have equal response in that same subgroup, right? So just remember that when you're like, oh, it's only adult. No, it's Still's disease. So I wanted to point that out as well. And then this was a slide that she had on the actual trial. And again, I think Katie shared that with you. And that is the last one that was there. You can learn more on the clinical trials link. And the things that I highlighted that I think are the most important that you might want to take away here is what they're trying to achieve. So in their trial, a primary endpoint is the most important thing you're going to measure. And then the key secondary or exploratory are, okay, we believe that these can also be important. So, but we don't know that they're going to make as big of an impact as the primary. So that's what they're still going to measure those though. And so I kind of highlighted what those were. And I did also in the bottom here do our little definition. And I'm sure most of you have heard these terms before, but maybe didn't know what they measured. So your CRP for inflammation, and ESR is really looking at the red blood cells. And so that's kind of their endpoint. They're hoping that at the end of the trial that they'll be able to really see an improvement in the blood work and the biomarkers, a change in those IL-18 levels that we saw in those earlier slides that are really elevated in certain people living with Still's disease. So it's very positive. It's an exciting time for research. And again, if you're interested in that, then we do have the link for you. You can learn more that way.